From turning national heroes to being estranged and stripped of their honor for defecting, the Stastny brothers did incredible things on ice as well as off it. Let's start where it all began for the brothers. Early life. The story of the Stastny brothers starts in communist Czechoslovakia, now modern-day Slovakia. Marian was born on the 8th of January 1953, Peter on the 18th of September 1956, and Anton on the 5th of August 1959. Their father, Stanislav Stastny, was a hydroelectric project worker, and his wife Frantiska stayed at home to cater for the kids. The couple had two boys before the trio, Bohumil and Vladimir, and their last-born was a girl named Eva. The trio grew up playing hockey outdoors at home by improvising with whatever they could lay their hands on. They shared not only their passion for the sport, but also an idol in the person of the national hero Václav Nedomansky. In their adolescence, Václav defected to the West to later play in the NHL, a path that we would see the brothers take as they went from national heroes to fugitives in their motherland. Hockey in Czechoslovakia. The brothers' natural liking for hockey meant they had a unique flair in the sport. With Marian on the right wing, Anton on the left, and Peter down the middle, an attack with the Stastny brothers was a nightmare for any opposition team. The two eldest of the trio, Marian and Peter, were already playing professionally for their hometown team, Slovan Bratislava, in the Czech-Slovak Hockey League, while their younger brother Anton was still trying to rise through the junior ranks. In 1976, we witnessed the Stastny brothers help Czechoslovakia win gold at the World Hockey Championship in Poland. Peter's 12 points and Marian's 6 were enough to help their nation win 9 games while going unbeaten en route to victory. As much as they resented the communist government of their country, a viewpoint they got from their father, they sure did make their country proud with this victory. As national heroes, they enjoyed the perks that came with bringing glory to the nation. This included expensive cars and apartments worth years of labor to an average Czechoslovakian, not to mention 1,000 korunas for every match they won, which is the equivalent of a week and a half's worth of wages. But unbeknownst to them, their countrymen were not the only ones keeping a close eye on them during their success, as we will find out later. A year after the triumph of his brothers at the World Championship, Anton joined them in Slovan Bratislava. The 1977-78 season was the first time the Stastny brothers were playing professionally together, and between the three of them, they had 145 points. The following season, they combined for a total of 180, 35 more than their previous season. But this was just the beginning of the end of their time in their home country. Defection and the NHL. Since 1976, the watchful eyes of Giles Ledger had been on the Stastny brothers. The former director of scouting for the Toronto Toros was responsible for getting the Eastern European legend Václav Nedomansky beyond the border and across the Atlantic Ocean. But when the WHA and NHL merged in 1979, Ledger lost his job. He had star players on his radar, but no team to bring them to. Meanwhile, in Quebec, the president of the fairly new Nordiques, Marcel Aubut, was running out of time to build a solid team to compete in the NHL. He too had heard about the Stastny brothers and needed them, and Giles knew just how to get them. So in 1979, Aubut hires Ledger as the Nordiques Director of Player Development, and thus began the European Project, a quest to bring all three of the Stastny brothers to Quebec. The only thing Aubut and Ledger needed was a reason strong enough for the Stastny brothers to leave, because they weren't just home, but they were living and celebrating like kings. Any one of us sure wouldn't want to give that up, but their days as Czechoslovak hockey royalty was numbered, and the only thing that could make them think anywhere but home was better was a compromise to what they loved the most: hockey. Ledger and Aubut drove down south from Quebec to talk to their prospective stars, but security proved to be too much of an obstacle and they couldn't make direct contact with the brothers. Their efforts weren't the most fruitful, and they were going back to Quebec disappointed. Months passed, and along with it, the chances of the brothers leaving grew slimmer. But around the same time, the Czechoslovakia team was far from their peak. Drama in their domestic team was bringing Slovan Bratislava to their knees. Shady businesses and trades meant the team wasn't as strong as it was, stripping them of their competitiveness, and soon enough, the Stastny brothers were having second thoughts about the future of their careers. Over halfway through the year, the two parties would make contact again, but this time it would be the Stastny brothers who would initiate contact with the Nordiques. While in Austria with the Czechoslovakian team ahead of games with Finland and the Soviet Union, Peter went to the post office to talk to Ledger over the phone. He had heard what he wanted to do. The Nordiques were still interested and willing to take the risk to bring them to Quebec. Not just Peter and Anton, but their wives as well. Unfortunately, Marian couldn't leave because his wife and kids had not made the trip with him to Austria, and he was also hoping to leave for Canada through the proper channels. Nevertheless, less than a day later, Ledger and Abit were in Innsbruck, Austria at a hotel close to where the brothers were staying. When the two parties met, they had agreed on a 6-year contract worth $1.5 million each, but the only thing left was leaving. They could have left right there and then, but given how patriotic they were, they wanted to play their country's game against the Soviet Union before leaving. Arrangements had been made for the brothers and their wives to say goodbye to Marian and travel to Austria, where they would be safe and Canada-bound once they reached the Canadian embassy. But even in Austria they weren't safe, as Ledger and Abit had to evade Czechoslovak police once the brothers were recognized. The next few hours played out like a spy movie, as the embassy sent police to the hotel where the Stastnys were staying to escort them to the embassy without getting stopped by the Czechoslovak security forces. As fate would have it, their efforts were not in vain, and they made it to the Canadian embassy that night and Montreal the next. They were finally free, and there was nothing their government could do to them. But that couldn't be said about their brother Marian, who wasn't signed along with his brother. He faced the repercussions of his brother's actions by being removed from his club and national team. Marian was miserable, unemployed, and very much hated by his countrymen. Halfway across the world, Peter and Anton were weighed down with the guilt of it, but that was not the only problem he was facing. NHL Career. The game they loved and life in general was not the same as back home. Peter's wife Darina wasn't fluent in English or French, and this made her isolated from their neighbors, making her life not the most pleasant. The Stastnys found it difficult to fit in, even on ice. The style of play over in North America was so different that despite how good of a player Peter was, he was still subject to criticism. But he and his brother didn't risk their lives coming to Canada to play like mediocre players. They were stars before now, and it didn't take them long to adapt and cement their dominance in the NHL. If they were going to shatter the glass ceiling for foreign players, they'd have to start by shattering a few records. And an 11-7 victory against the Washington Capitals, Peter's 4 goals and 4 assists and Anton's 3 goals and 5 assists meant they shared the record for most goals by a rookie in game. By the end of the season, Anton had a remarkable rookie year, racking up an incredible 85 points. But it was his older brother Peter who stole the season at the time, a record-breaking 109 points and 70 assists, a performance truly deserving of the Calder Trophy. And for many more years to come in the NHL, he would be known as Peter the Great. It was a good start to a hockey career in North America, and it could only get better as a year later the Nordiques got the final piece of the puzzle, the eldest of the trio, Marian Stastny. Through falsified documents, Abit was able to get Marian and his family out of Czechoslovakia and reunite them with the rest of their family in Quebec. Marian was more than happy to see his brothers, despite what they had caused him after they left. In their first season together, the 1981-92 season, they had 300 points between them. Peter led his team with 139 points, and in the league, he was third to Wayne Gretzky and Mike Bossy, who had 212 and 147 respectively. And with the addition of Marian, their playoff runs were much better. They took the Nordiques not only to the playoffs, but also to the conference finals, where they would get swept in 4 games by the New York Islanders. To be fair, the Islanders were not only eventually champions, but defending champions as well. The next time they made it that far in the playoffs was in 1985, but this time they would meet the Philadelphia Flyers. The conference finals went as far as Game 6 and ended with the Nordiques defeated, despite the good fight they put up. That was the closest they had gotten to the Stanley Cup, and halfway through the decade, it looked like they were past their prime. Twilight years, records, and retirement. Marian may have been the last to come, but he would be the first to lead the league. Towards the end of his first season, he had a bad shoulder injury that just wouldn't let him catch a break. It forced him to end his first season early, and he just wasn't the same after that. In his last season with the Nordiques, he only registered 21 points, while Peter and Anton combined for 180. He wasn't the same player he was when he arrived, courtesy of the injury, and he wasn't in the same bracket as his brothers anymore. He spent his last season in the NHL in Toronto with the Maple Leafs before going back to Europe to play in Switzerland. He would later retire in 1987. With their big brother gone and age slowly catching up to them, Peter and Anton's days in a Nordic uniform were numbered as well. After 650 games and 636 points, the third highest by a Nordic player, Anton left the NHL for Switzerland in 1989. After 3 years there, he returned home to Slovakia to play and retire where it all started, with the Slovan Bratislava. So with both brothers no longer in Quebec with Peter, it was perhaps time to move beyond the city and franchise he had made so many memories in. In 1990, the New Jersey Devils acquired him through a trade, but he would eventually spend his last season with the St. Louis Blues, retiring in 1995. A truly stellar career that earned him a place in the NHL Hall of Fame. He admired everyone, including fellow stars such as himself. Gretzky even told The Athletic, "Fans truly loved watching Peter Stastny and his two brothers play. He embraced Quebec City, and the people loved him. He went on to have a stellar career, just an elite player." But in all Peter had seen and accomplished, this was one of the things that he was most proud of.
Having to play at the highest level, having to play in the same line with two of my brothers.
Influence and life after hockey. As much as Václav Nedomansky paved the way for their transition from Europe to Canada, the success of the Stastny brothers also allowed other Europeans to make the almost impossible journey to the West. European NHL stars such as Jari Kurri, Thomas Steen, and Mats Naslund owe their accomplishments to the Stastny brothers and the road they paved. And in their home country, what they inspired can only be described as a pandemic of young Czech and Slovak defectors. The scale of it was so big that the National Hockey Administration had to do its best to curb it. Very few offensive lines have ever featured siblings in them, and even fewer have been as successful as the Stastny brothers. The Stastny brothers broke both records and showed that their love for the sport superseded the political turmoil that plagued their country, inspiring a generation of players after. Truly, the sport wouldn't have been the same without them, and we won't be able to continue showing you great stories like this until you like and subscribe.